I hope you are well and healthy and coolish. And we're excited to have you here today. We have a lot of work to do. We're going to have some updates and do some collaboration work that to help our framework and our screening criteria. And so I think, Jake, if you would bring our screens up or our slides. All right. All right, so we have closed captioning in English and in Spanish. English closed captions are available within Zoom and YouTube. Users can follow this link to view both English and Spanish captions in a separate browser window. So https://ibr.news/captions. Next slide. How to access closed captions. At the bottom middle of your screen, you should see a menu of options. If you can't see the menu, hover your mouse over the bottom middle of the screen. Click on the CC icon and a separate window with captions will appear. Next screen. Webinar participation tips. Thank you for joining us today. So glad to have you and your expertise here. Please join audio by either phone or computer, not both. We encourage panelists to turn on your video. It's great to see you. Please keep your audio on mute when not speaking. Please say your name when you begin to speak. And if you experience technical difficulties, please contact program staff at 360-329-6744. Next slide. Public input instructions. There'll be an opportunity to provide brief public input later in the meeting today. To submit input after the meeting, email comments to info@interstatebridge.org with EAG Public Comment in the subject line, or call 888-503-6735 and state EAG Public Comment in your message. Next. So our agenda, we start with our program administrator update. We have an update on the screening criteria and performance measures. We're going to do a data deep dive 2.0. Talk about our equity framework development, elements and timeline, and public comment. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to pass to Greg Johnson, our program administrator. Here you go, take it away.
Thank you so much, Roberta.
Yes.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. So the program has been busy since last we met. We've had conversations both with our executive steering group and our bi-state legislative group. So we can go to the next slide. We our executive steering group, we presented the framework for equity. We presented the definition of equity that that this team came up with and approved. So we also talked about the guidance that we received from our federal government on purpose and need, and how we are to move the program forward. So we put on the table for the executive steering group that we have talked to our federal partners. They agree with the putting both equity and climate in the document. It just will not appear in purpose and need. So as you are aware, we're working on the framework to move it forward, both on climate and equity. And that framework basically serves as a blueprint of the ideas that are being captured in our conversations with you guys, with our other partners, to talk about how we put this into the program. Some of it will appear as screening criteria as we are looking at different design options, and will help screen out some of those design options. Some will appear as construction specifications for when we get to the construction phase. Some will appear as when the project is built, how will it observe equity as it is operating? How will it observe climate concerns as it is operating? So those are some of the things that that have been talked about, and we have alignment throughout our groups to talk about how we move this forward and the path that we're taking. So we also talked to our bi-state legislative committee at the end of May, and once again, they are on board with the direction that we're taking the program. So these things are key critical in how we are going to get overall consensus on the direction that we're moving in. So once again, we canceled our July meeting for the executive steering group because right now we're in a phase of the project where we're doing a deep dive into the data. And you're going to hear some of that this afternoon, talking about the data that we're gathering, the analysis that we're going to do, as well as some of the modeling that will take place to drive us towards putting forward the IBR solution for this program. So this is going to be a tremendously busy number of months. We're hoping when we late next winter, early spring, that we will have answers to the questions of how many lanes across this bridge. Will there be an interchange on Hayden Island, or will it be a partial interchange, or will we take those movements off of Marine Drive? We also, by that time, will hope to have an answer on the mode of high capacity transit. And this team is going to be key critical in looking at all of those proposed solutions for the equity element that is involved in each of those. So it's going to be an exciting time. Once again, we're going to be digging deep into data, and we're going to take you guys along to look over our shoulders and make sure that we are hitting all of the marks that you feel are necessary to give us an equitable outcome. So let's go to the next slide. So the community advisory group, as a matter of fact, we have our next community advisory group next week. So we are meeting with the CAG members. We had an interesting session where we basically took an hour of the meeting the last time, and we listened. We did a listening session to the CAG members to talk about what their concerns were, to make sure their voices were heard as we were reaching alignment with all of our other groups. We wanted to make sure that we had not left anyone behind. So once again, we also filled a vacant at-large position on the CAG. One of our CAG members had to leave because of family commitments. So we filled that, and the new person is on board and cooking along right with the team. So once again, the feedback we received was valuable. We have I think the wind at our back, as far as we have alignment between all of our advisory teams, as well as the bi-state and the executive steering group. So once again, we want to hear your authentic voices. If you have concerns about anything that we're doing, please speak up. Please let it be heard. We have some tremendously important decisions to make here in the upcoming year. And once again, we want to have this team looking over our shoulders, helping us make sure that the right thing is being considered and the right thing is being done. So with that, I will turn the floor back over. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg. And we have time for some questions. So please raise your hand. And
No questions?
Meg has questions.
Just have one question. Hi, this is Meg. What was the pushback, especially from the feds, about not including the equity and climate piece in our purpose and need statement?
So purpose and need is one of the foundational pieces of the National Environmental Policy Act. It's the piece where if you're going to get sued, it will more than likely be involving purpose and need. So our federal partners are very careful around that. And as we have a record of decision that established the 6 problems that we've talked to you about, they were concerned that, okay, if you change the purpose and need, you are changing the foundational piece of this document. And that means that you should probably go back to the start and start the process over, take into account all of the other options and alternatives that are out there. And we've heard from most everyone that is not a path that they want to travel. So we have other ways to ensure that climate and equity are at the forefront of what we do. Once again, creating the framework so it can be part of our screening, so it can be part of our construction specifications. Those are the things where this will show up in tremendously meaningful ways. So instead of taking a fight that we were not going to win, and so it was the decision of a number of different folks that, okay, we will find the ways to embed these 2 key critical things into what we are doing and not have it in purpose and need and not start back from square one. So that was what the thought process was. And we hope that we've shared this as we've moved along with this group as well about that decision. It was not an easy decision. There were a lot of things that went into consideration, but we know that if we started over, we'd be pushing this program back probably anywhere from 18 months to 2.5 years. So, but that was the thought process and the reasoning behind it. Any other questions or concerns?
All right. Okay. Great. Well, thank you. Thank you, Greg.
If something else comes up during the meeting, I'll be here all meeting, listening in. And so if something else comes up, please don't be afraid to ask that question. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your accessibility. All right. So we're going to have Angela Findley and to talk about the update on the screening criteria and performance measures. Angela, it's yours.
Great. Thank you, Roberta. Good evening. Glad to be back. I'm glad to hope everybody is staying cool this evening. It's a hot one out there today. I'm going to go ahead and jump into just giving a quick update on how we are moving forward with the framework to establish the screening criteria and program performance measures. So we'll start off with a few definitions, just so we're all on the same page and understanding the different terms. So we've talked about design options and alternatives, and I just wanted to clarify they are two different things. A design option is a specific component of an alternative, and in our screening process, we will consider them on their own as we look at different options to move forward as part of the solution or the preferred alternative on this program. So from a graphics perspective, on this slide, I've noted different options as kind of small bricks, if you will, small rectangles. And then the alternative is the compilation of these different design options. So you have this whole pack of different elements of the design, whether that's the transit facilities and park and ride facilities, or whether it's an interchange configuration or a bridge type. And there's many more elements, just a few examples there. We'll go to the next slide, please. Other terms that we talk about are, and this is kind of three levels, and the big picture component is ultimately what outcomes are we targeting for this interstate bridge replacement program. These are outcomes that should be measurable for the program, that vision, that end goal. And then stepping down a bit, there are going to be specific program level performance measures. How do we measure the success of this program over the lifetime of its delivery? And then more specific, when we are looking at just this next, the rest of this calendar year and into early 2022, as Greg mentioned, is what are the specific design options that we're going to be looking at, those different pieces that build up a single alternative that we can move forward. And just to give a few examples to explain this, Jake, if you just, perfect. This is an example, and this is something that the team just came up with to demonstrate this. By all means, we haven't defined all of the performance measures at all yet. But if, for example, we identify an outcome of this program is to promote economic empowerment for communities of concern, one of the long-term program level performance measures that we could use to measure whether we reach that outcome or not is to set a certain percent goal on the number or value of contracts that are awarded to disadvantaged business enterprises, DBE firms. And that is something that can be implemented regardless of which alternative or design options move forward. That is something that would be implemented at the time that construction is ready to begin. Another example, if we click one more time, Jake. Perfect. In this case, we identified an outcome of more single occupancy vehicle trips to transit, and specific screening criteria that we could apply to different design options are looking at whether there is a reduction in the percent of traffic on I-5 that's moving across in vehicles versus transit, looking at whether an option increases transit ridership or not. So I hope you can understand the difference between the screening criteria are helping us choose the design options that make up the alternative, whereas the performance measures are really over the life of the delivery of this program. Next slide. Perfect. So we are just about ready to start getting the EAG's input on the design option screening criteria. And as Greg mentioned earlier, we will definitely be looking and relying on the equity framework and the climate framework, as well as some of the input that we got from this group and others when we were looking at trying to revise the purpose and needs statement. There was a lot of good work done. We saved it. We want to use it and tailor it so that we can help us screen down which design options would promote the best preferred alternative, the best solution for this project. And here's a couple of screening criteria. I should mention that there's so many screening criteria that we could develop. We've organized them into different categories. And so, for example, one of those categories can be the efficient movement of people and goods. And then one criterion within there is measuring the number of low-income households that are within a half mile of a transit station. So that, again, we can connect the transportation to where the people are who may be more inclined to take the transit. And so that's important that we make that connection. Again, the screening criteria are designed for this next phase of the project to develop and then evaluate the design options. They could also inform mitigation for the project as well as other commitments longer term. Next slide, please. And this is just a pretty simple schedule here. You see 2021, spring, summer, and fall. And you see kind of the design screening criteria and developing the design options running in parallel. The reason it's in parallel as opposed to being first the criteria, then the options, is we will be working on many of the criteria early on. But as we develop design options, those also inform the criteria to help us differentiate between the options. So it's a bit of an iterative process. And then by about the fall of this year and into, as Greg mentioned, the first few months of 2022 is when we will begin screening the different options to ultimately identify that one IBR solution to move forward into the next phase of the project, which would be the more detailed environmental analysis. Are there any questions on that? Roberta, do I have time to field any questions here if there are any?
You do, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I'll say while you're thinking of questions, one thing that as I've been thinking about this, we've talked to you about screening criteria and performance measures. We really wanted to help, again, get us all on the same page as to what they are, what their differences are. And one thing that I've kind of been thinking about is, the screening criteria kind of at the front end. It's like, how do we decide the details of what we're going to do? Performance measures are how successful were we at accomplishing our goals. So I don't know, that seemed to be helpful for me to frame it that way.
Very helpful. I think the more we can reiterate where we are in the process, because it can get very jargony. And so the more we can clarify where we are in the process and see that timeline was super helpful for me in my thinking, the better. How about any other questions? And y'all are a chatty group, so either you're super hot or we're really clear. And though I believe that we are clear, sort of, I think there's room for questions.
I know it's not the first time we've talked about this, so I'm glad that folks are clear on it.
I do have a
because we will be
Okay, here comes Steve.
shirts.
No, I like the program outcomes, and then having some measures there, and then I like the performance measures and indicators, and having a measure there. One of the things that is unclear is who and how is held accountable for the performance outcomes and the kind of program outcomes over the life of the program. How will that be kind of divided since it's an interagency program?
So I can jump in on that, Steve. So the contracts and the ownership of this infrastructure that we're looking to improve will be the DOTs. So the DOTs will be the ultimate parties held responsible for meeting these goals and criteria. And we've talked about ways to make sure that what is captured is easily held accountable by creating, whether it's intergovernmental agreements, letters of understanding that capture all of these things that we are putting on the table, whether it's through construction specifications. All of these things will be tools of accountability to hold the contractor, to hold the designers, to hold the owners, which are both DOTs, responsible and accountable for the things that that this group comes up with, that the community advisory group signs off on. So that's the accountability measure.
Thank you. And so just to dig it deeper, so for example, if I'm a contractor and I said I've got small business development goals of 20%, and if I don't meet them 6 months, 1 year when the program starts, how will I be held accountable as the prime contractor, for example? If that to that detail has not been thought about, yeah, I'll just stop right there.
So there are different tools. We have to be very careful. The DBE is a very prescribed federal program, and if you step outside and penalize beyond what the feds allow you to do, but what we're going to do is try and prepare DBEs. We're going to do things up front to make sure that the DBEs are ready to participate, and we're going to create opportunities through how we divide the work up to make sure that DBEs have a percentage that is recognizable to the EAG of something that you guys are saying this is appropriate. So it's not going to be an easy lift, no doubt, but we're going to do things that will prepare DBE contractors to fully be a part of this through how we divide the work up and how we contract the work out.
And just to build upon
Thank
that,
you.
I'm wondering if Nina Jones, who is the civil rights lead, Nina, are you there by chance? She may not be with us.
And I know what Nina would say. I used to work with Nina.
Right. But to build upon what Greg indicated, there are a number of tools that we know work to really encourage the prime contractor to meet both the workforce goals, because as we will anticipate that the EAG will have a lot to say in terms of the workforce goals we'll want to be reflective of our definition, as well as the DBE goals. There are some tools that we know work that we've used in the region.
There are carrots and there are sticks.
That's exactly right. There are carrots and sticks. That's right.
now that you are saying that, so could it be that even for future projects, could this performance here, if folks are not meeting what they're promising to do here, would the DOT have some carrot and sticks for future projects? Would it be part of us holding folks accountable that if you are not performing here, you are putting yourself at risk for access to future opportunities? Is that part of the carrot and stick? I'm asking the old, yeah, okay.
And those are things that, like I said, not having been in the Oregon DOT world for very long, I know in other DOTs, there are contractor rankings that impact their ability to bid projects if they fail to meet certain standards. So, but those are all things that we will be looking into and making sure that every tool is brought to bear to meet these goals that are set up.
So we have Sabrina and Lily.
Hi, yeah, this is Sabrina with Metro. So the explanation was super clear. Thank you all for that. I have a question about how the screening criteria and the performance measures relate to the equity definition. We have an equity definition that's broken out into process and outcomes. On the outcomes piece, that's clear to me, you know, how the screening criteria and the performance measures work, but I'm not so clear, and it's about what we do, but how do they relate to how we do it throughout the project?
So part of the how we do it will be how we contract. There are ways that of contracting that can create equity. And like I said, I don't want to poke a sleeping bear, but if you look at the CMTC method that was used on Rose Quarter, that brought a minority-owned firm to the forefront. So there are different ways that sometimes you will put in low bid type situations, sometimes you won't. And sometimes low bid situations has a tendency to screen out DBEs. So if we made the entire project low bid, that would be considered an inequitable process. So we would be looking at what ways that we contract, what process that we use that would be the most equitable to DBEs.
And Sabrina, I'll add, as far as the definition goes, so currently we're working to develop some draft screening criteria that we'll bring to this group next month to go in more depth, relying on the definition and incorporating that definition into our framework that we'll dive into a little bit later this meeting. So hopefully that'll add some clarification of how, you know, all of it connects. But yeah, I think that's great to call out, that we want to make sure to continue to reference back to that.
Yeah, I think my question was more around pieces like decision-making and community engagement and some of those things that, you know, we've talked about, like, you know, community being able to see their priorities reflected in the outcome. So I'm wondering if those kinds of process points will be incorporated into performance measures, and I guess, yeah.
So a couple of things that are on the table. We're looking at whether there will be a community benefits agreement, which will have a community-based oversight over a number of different issues. So that's one way to get that accountability into the process. So we're looking at how that might play out for this program, whether project labor agreements, all of those type of things are on the table to be discussed as we get closer to understanding what our project is going to be.
And Greg, I would just add on to that in terms of maybe more nearer term decisions and inputs with this design options and the screening criteria and ultimately the screening of those. We're looking at public involvement events later this year, fall-ish timeframe, to get inputs on that decision-making process.
And I'll add to that, Sabrina. Hi, I'm Nina. Forgive me, staying hydrated during this heat wave we have going on here. But there are a number of methodologies that we use in order to ensure compliance with with the goals that we are communicating, with the goals that we have essentially transferred from you to the project. So part of that will be my responsibility, and anyone that has worked with me on my projects know I run a tight ship. So we definitely believe in good relationships, constant communication, authentic dialogue around what you're doing, being creative to increase the capacity of our DBEs, and making sure that we have a lot of support systems in place to assist them to be successful while working on our projects. And that not only goes to just around DBE contracting, but also with regards to the new hires that this project is going to bring. There's going to be a lot of jobs created. So there's a lot of tools that we put in place as well with regards to supporting new apprentices and those who are even moving from apprentice to journeyman on this project, especially around our people of color and women, and increasing their representation in the workforce.
Thank you.
Lily?
Thank you. So I just want to amplify and make sure that I heard right both Stephen Nakana's question and Greg's answer. And I really appreciated Stephen's question about making sure that we can utilize the track record that contractors who are bidding on things have had already in our area. And I would just like to amplify that as an important thing. And we have that data. I mean, it's not a secret, even if there's not a system in place, like we know who has failed to meet their equity-related goals on past infrastructure projects. And I really feel strongly that we need to utilize that. Both in this program and then to provide that information for projects moving forward. I think that's fantastic. Thank you for bringing that up, Steve.
So Lily, you're absolutely right. There are bidding methods that give points to contractors for their past performance or take away points for their past performance. So those are all tools that we are looking at to bring to bear to hold folks accountable for what they have done. And if they're a good performer and their price is a slightly higher, maybe their good performance gives them points that takes into account their higher price. So those are the type of things that we know we want to look at and make a part of the program. So just so we're not doing a strict low bid and getting the lowest price, but the worst performer.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. So I want to move us on, and I'm gonna move now to our data deep dive with Jake. And Jake, take it away. And I really appreciate the questions, everyone. They help clarify things, and the more that we can ask our questions and clarify, the better.
All right, thanks, Roberta. So this is Jake. So last meeting, I provided some information to you all and walked through some demographics to give kind of a baseline of the program area, and got a lot of great feedback about additional data that you all would like to see. And so tried to be responsive to that and compile some additional stuff to inform our thinking as we develop our equity framework, as we develop the screening criteria and performance measures and other strategies related to equity for the program. So one of the things that was requested was looking at transit commuting by race and ethnicity. So here I've got a chart that shows 3 different areas. One's the program area, one's City of Portland, one City of Vancouver. And it's the percentage of workers who use transit to commute. So I'm showing the percentages on that far left light green bar for the program area. So what you see by race, if you look at American Indian, Alaska Native, and Black commuters, those two have the highest rates of commuting by transit at around 20%. For people of color combined as a whole, it's 13% in the program area, compared to for white non-Hispanic, it's closer to 9%. So there are these kind of patterns you see, which I think a lot of you are probably not too surprised that we do know that people of color as a percentage take transit at a higher rate than their white counterparts. But there are variations within different races and ethnicities. You'll also note that Portland, because of the available transit services, has a greater percentage of workers taking transit, and when you compare it to Vancouver. On the flip side of that is workers who drive alone to work. And what I found interesting here was the differences don't seem to be quite as stark. For all commuters, or all commuters of color in the program area, about 2/3 drive alone, and that's pretty close to what it is for white non-Hispanic commuters. There's some variation when you look at, say, American Indian, Alaska Native. Looks to be some lower rates, about 56% driving alone to work. You look at Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander workers, that's 59%, but pretty similar rates between about 60 and 70% are driving alone to work across most of these geographies. City of Portland's a little lower than that. City of Vancouver's a little higher than that. Again, I think related to the available transit options and other transportation options. Another thing that we heard was interest in transportation costs, and because of how much of an impact this project could have on those costs. What I'm showing here is a screenshot of a tool called the H+T. It stands for Housing Plus Transportation Index. It's a pretty cool tool that you can look at different geographies and you can see on average for that area what percentage of folks' income is being spent on housing and what percentage is on transportation, and then combined. The detail of that, as far as percentage, they do percent of the area median income if you're curious about that. But what I'm showing here is an area just north of downtown Vancouver. You have those households paying on average about 19% of median income on housing and about 20% on transportation. And we can look at this at a variety of different geographic levels, which I'm going to show you here. So again, average, and this is over the course of a year. In terms of percentages, we see it's for most geographies, it's around 20% of household costs go towards transportation. But there are some differences that make a big impact in terms of actual dollars, and I'll show you that on the next slide. Our region as a whole, it's about 22% of household costs are spent on transportation. But you look at Clark County, and that's 23%. You compare that to, say, Portland, That's 19%. And what does that mean in terms of actual dollars? That's where it gets to be kind of a little more meaningful, if you ask me. So that same comparison between Clark County and Portland, an average household paying $14,000 a year in Clark County versus closer to $12,000 in Portland, that $2,300 difference, $2,400 difference, that's no insignificant amount. So you see the impact that kind of having fewer options besides driving alone to work and to meet other needs. Obviously, it causes households to incur a lot more costs of their transportation. So again, just something else to kind of think about as we're looking at the impacts and potential benefits of the project. In terms of commute times, we heard that was of interest to this group, and there's with some of this data, you're a little limited at how detailed you can get, like how granular geographically you can get, whether you can look at neighborhoods or cities. This data is available for our region and for the city of Portland. It's unfortunately didn't have city of Vancouver separately or each of the counties separately. But what I'm showing here is commute times by race. And so what stands out for me is an average commute time for Black and Latino workers is about 30 minutes. You compare that to white workers and it's 25 minutes. Overall for the region, average is about 26 minutes. And you might think, okay, it's a few minutes. How significant is that? And these are averages. And so there are going to be extremes within averages that pull. So that 30 minutes versus 25-minute average, that might mean for a lot of people, it's more like an hour and that's pulling it closer to that 30 minutes. That's kind of the challenge with averages here. But bottom line is, in City of Portland, we do see differences where workers of color tend to have longer commutes. Pretty similar pattern if we look at our whole region, and this does include Vancouver. You see that for people of color as a whole, it's about 27-minute average commute compared to white is about 26 minutes. That's fairly close. There's still a disparity when you look at Black commuters versus white or Native American commuters versus others. And the kind of the thing here that when we're thinking about this project, just like transportation costs, how much does the congestion on the bridge cause in terms of the delays, and how much is where people live and how much more of that congestion they need to go through to get to the places, to get to work. That can have a serious impact in terms of what people are able to do with the rest of their time. So definitely big implications there. Looking at it by income, commuting time by income, it's kind of similar. If we're looking at these averages in Portland, for those who are below 200% of the federal poverty level, which you don't need to know exactly, what that dollar amount is necessarily. The census defines it as essentially struggling to meet basic needs. That's that threshold. So those who are fit under that, struggling to meet basic needs, they have longer commutes than those who are a bit better off financially, with 28-minute average commutes versus 26 minutes for those who are at 350% of the poverty level or above. It's more flat across the region as a whole between different income levels when we look at this, about 26 or 27-minute average commute times. Another tool that we're using and that we're going to be looking at to evaluate, to inform our screening criteria and possibly to do some of the screening activities is this tool that Metro developed that we had a nice meeting about just the other day with Sabrina and other folks at Metro. It's called the Economic Value Atlas. Basically what it does, it has a lot of different demographic and other indicators where we can look at different neighborhoods. These are census tracts, and we can see one of the features is we can see areas that are at risk for higher risk for gentrification and displacement. That's based on a variety of different factors that I can give more details about the methodology if you're curious. But this and this example here doesn't show the Washington side of the river because this example was for Southwest Corridor, but we're working with Metro to expand that analysis so that we can tailor it to what we want to look at here for the whole program corridor in both Oregon and Washington. But we could see around the project area what areas might be have the higher potential for gentrification and displacement based on program improvements, and what does that mean in terms of the different options we're looking at. Another tool is that we're using is Remix. It's a public transit essentially planning tool, and what I'm showing here is another evaluation that I heard from you all you were interested in, and that we certainly want to do. Is you can put in an existing transit system, and you plop that there's a person in the middle there where that dark blue and has the rings around it. Her name's Jane. And so you can plop a person at any point and see how far they can get in a certain amount of time on transit. So this is showing in 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 60 minutes, how far Jane can get on the transit system. And the cool thing is you can put in a scenario of like, okay, let's say we add a transit line here and a transit station here. What does that mean for Jane? How much farther can she get? And so we're going to be doing that using this tool with the different options for the alignment for the transit component of the project. Finally, one more thing that is kind of in development is we heard from you want to see not just individual demographics and what those look like, but what is the layering? Where do we see high concentrations of people of color and people with disabilities and low-income households and older adults and that? So it's drafty, I will say, and it's a combination of all of these to see how many are concentrated on top of each other in different areas of the program area and the region. So essentially, the more of concentrations of our populations that we've defined in our equity definition, the higher it scores. And so on this map, the darker green the area. So I'm showing here what that means in terms of once we add up all of those scores, like say, if it has a high concentration of BIPOC communities, it gets 2 points. If it doesn't, it gets 0 points. If it has a high concentration of low-income households, it gets another 2 points. And we can play with those parameters and those points. But the way that it's set up this first run resulted in kind of something kind of interesting here that kind of confirms what we were talking about last time. Along where the Vine goes and along where SR 500 goes on the Washington side, you have a concentration of communities that we're really focused on in our equity definition. That's outside of our program area, but what does that mean for the transit alignment for the project? What does that mean for access overall on the system, given the types of improvements we might make? And then just zoomed out a little bit, and I'll say in the orange there, that was from 2013. That was the transit route that was proposed there. The white things are the station locations. So a couple in downtown Vancouver, one on Hayden Island and one at Clark College. You can see this just as a point of reference for the region, those darker green areas, again, more communities of concern. And you won't be surprised to see a lot higher concentrations in East Portland and East Multnomah County, lower generally in inner neighborhoods. But then you look at Clark County and you have a lot of similar high concentrations. So just to quickly I anticipate we did hear some requests for data that we're going to have to do some work to figure out. So Greg mentioned we're modeling, we're looking at various types of data to combine when we're looking at our screening criteria and that. So what about, looking at, can we see how, let's say, where workers of color are traveling, where their origins and destinations are. Can we see what those traffic patterns on and tie demographics to them? Unfortunately, there's not, at least that we have found, great way to do that. You can look at where general people are traveling, what points they're traveling between, but then you have to kind of look at the populations that live in those areas and draw some conclusions that way. So anyway, we're working to figure out the best ways to do that. It's just not quite as clean of data as you might hope. Then what about figures for people with disabilities? As far as the census is concerned, we weren't able to see, like, say, means of transportation or commute times by disability. So we're gonna have to look at some other sources for that. Maybe transit agency surveys can supplement us there. Maybe you all have some recommendations. I've reached out to Matt Sears, who provided some great information. And so we'll have to do some of that to try to fill in those gaps. So trying to look at time here so that I'm not going too long. I think we have a couple minutes for questions. Is that right?
Yeah, we have 3 minutes for questions.
Great.
All right, Meg.
Hi, it's Meg. For the time commute statistic that you just presented, Jake, is that one way or is that both ways per day? So is like the average 30 minutes, is that one way for commute or both?
Pretty sure it's one way.
One way, okay. So just times that by 2, assuming that people are coming home in an evening and that's the day. Okay, cool. That's all I needed, thank you.
Lily's giving a thumbs up, but not a question.
Thanks, Lily.
All right. Well, if there are no questions right now, I think let's go into Chris Lepe. So Chris Lepe is going to talk with us about IBR and equity and is helping us develop our framework.
All right, hey everybody. How's everybody doing today? Hope you're doing well, staying cool out there. I'm gonna jump into the equity framework, kind of the work that we've been doing and set forth a bit of a structure that we're discussing at this point. Get your guys' input on that. We're gonna break out into groups and have a good discussion on that, as well as a timeline. I know that last meeting, one of the things that was requested is kind of the arc of this framework development and where we're going with it and what we're going to be chewing on or what you will be chewing on over the coming months. So we'll present that to you as well. And then we'll be sharing a few examples of different equity lenses or sets of questions that different frameworks and toolkits that have included in the Pacific Northwest. And so we'll share those out and see if those are useful. If you guys think that having questions of those sort for a project, a specific project like this, would be beneficial, and if so, what questions we should be posing. I know that we've had some prior conversations on that, and we'll be sharing out some of your prior comments and then building upon that. So next slide, please. Looks like it's frozen there. There we go. So, as we've noted before, the equity framework is an essential step, even more so now, as was talked about earlier during our meeting, to provide a shared understanding of what the program seeks to achieve and how it will be achieved as a tool to achieve those equity outcomes. And so the framework identifies the steps the program will take to advance equity, including an emphasis on both process and outcomes, as you all laid out in the equity definition. I won't go over this with too much emphasis. We've talked about this before, but the framework, the general concepts are the definition, what are our objectives, how are we going to measure success, and then putting that into action, the implementation piece. That implementation piece is going to be a bulk of the work that we will be focusing in on over the coming months. So the structure, the key elements of the framework are broken up into 5, but really it's the meat of the matter is the context setting information and that background to orient folks, the equity definition that you all have worked on, and if there needs to be additional defining to be done, that would be included in that section, and then the operationalizing piece, which would include things like the equity objectives, measures of success, and activities. And as you can see there, the glossary and authors and contributors, and other important information towards the tail end there. Next slide. And so going through each of those sections, so the context, the background would include, for example, the purpose of the framework, the historic context, which is always really important to lay out. I know that's been an important comment among the committee here to make sure that we're relaying that and contextualizing that historic context as part of this project. The equity commitment of the program and the demographic overview as well, what the populations are in the corridor where they reside, some of the information that Jake was presenting. Second is a definition of equity. And like I said before, and as you all know very well, equity as it relates to this project means both the process as well as the outcomes. And then, you know, the real kind of difficult sort of thing to untangle here is how do we then apply, how do we operationalize the definition and what we want to try to achieve within this project? How do we make that happen? Going all the way from the results that we want to see from an equity standpoint to the indicators and the performance measures, how we're going to measure success, how we're going to know when we have arrived, or that, you know, we will be arriving at those results, what the strategies that we will employ to get there, to be able to reach those indicators, those performance measures, and therefore those results. And then finally, the activities or the actions and the accountability piece. So it's not just about laying out what kind of actions or activities will be done, will be committed to, but you know, who is going to implement, when, and so on and so forth. We are thinking about the kind of products and tools that we might include as part of this section. And one of those tools is this sort of equity lens or series of questions that we would be putting forth to use over the arc of the process. So the schedule that we're laying out, and we're going into a bit of warp speed here. There's a lot of heavy lifting that we're going to be doing over the coming months. So for those of you that maybe we're thinking we're going to go a little too slow, well, now we're going to be going really fast, and we're going to be hoping to leverage your all of your collective minds in getting there. One of the things that we may need to do, and it's sort of a question for the committee and the project team, is whether we convene a subcommittee to meet in between our larger meetings to kind of keep that ball rolling in between meetings and help flesh things out. So that'll be a question that we'll follow up with y'all at a later time. But in June, as you know, here we are talking about the outline. You just had some information presented about the equity index and data analysis, and then, you know, we're about to jump into the equity lens and guiding questions part of the conversation. In July, we'll be presenting to you a first draft of the framework, and then getting into the section on operationalizing equity, which would include the screening criteria, looking at indicators and performance measures, and then also the activities and accountability. So really meaty substance there that we'll be diving into in July. That'll be followed up in August with the second draft of the framework, finalizing our screening criteria, continuing discussion on indicators and performance measures, and also on activities and accountability. And finally, in September, we hope to be able to have y'all, you know, own and approve the final draft, and then vote to approve. And I think we're calling it a final draft because it's a working document that will evolve over time. But that's the game plan from now till the fall, till September. So many frameworks and toolkits include a series of questions that are intended to help think critically about each important step in the process. And part of the question for us would this be beneficial for this project, and what kind of questions should the IBR team be asking, or the various teams within IBR be asking when making key program decisions to make sure equity is embedded throughout. And so we presented a few different examples for you today from the city of Portland, King County, and Multnomah County. And I'll just go over the questions with you here. So Multnomah County, very extensive equity and empowerment lens that they created, and they have it broken down, for example, to people, place, process, power, with questions such as who is positively and negatively affected by this issue, and how are people traumatized or re-traumatized by your issue or decision area. And so, for example, kind of bringing in that trauma-informed perspective. How are public resources and investments distributed geographically? How are we meaningfully including or excluding communities of color who are affected? And who is the current issue, policy, or program shifting power dynamics to better integrate voices and priorities of community? How is the current issue, policy, or program shifting power dynamics to better integrate voices and priorities of communities of color? The City of Portland Racial Equity Toolkit, we've presented about the toolkit before, and the toolkit includes multiple steps. And under each of those steps, they have key questions that they pose, such as for step 1, set equitable outcomes. What are the intended equitable results in the community, and what community indicators measure those results? Step 2, collect and analyze data. What are the relevant disparities of communities of color? Step 3, understand the historical context. Will any historical disparities or impacts be a determining factor in the ability to benefit from this proposal? And step 4, engaging those most impacted. What did they tell you about the community, or those most impacted, tell you about the potential benefits or burdens resulting from this proposal, and did they identify any unintended consequences? And you'll notice that certain themes start to kind of emerge, and commonalities between these resources. Step 5, develop racially equitable strategies and confirm or modify outcomes. So given what you learned, how will the proposal increase and or decrease racial equity, and list any trade-offs? Step 6, implement changes. What is the plan for implementation? And step 7, evaluate accountability and report back. How will you continue to partner and deepen relationships with communities of color to make sure your proposal is working and sustainable for the long haul? The question of partnership and deepening those relationships. The last is King County, and then we'll be breaking into the discussion groups. The King County Equity Impact Review, so different kind of EIR, and they have phase 1 on scope, phase 2 on assess equity and community context, step 3 on analysis and decision process. And here they have a question on how will alternative actions differ in improving or worsening current equity conditions. Step 4 on implementation, are you staying connected with communities and employees? Are there sufficient monitoring and accountability systems to identify unintended consequences? And step 5 on ongoing learning. So I'm going to hand this over to Roberta. Roberta, do you want to kick us off here? We have oh, sorry, not quite yet, almost there. The last thing I'll say is that the guiding questions, some questions, some things that have been previously recommended by this group are the following. Are all communities that are affected by this bridge better than before it was replaced? Have best practices regarding accessibility been implemented? Question of accessibility. Do targeted outcomes align with past harms? What were we able to accomplish for targeted groups in evaluating? And finally, are we hiring responsible contractors with good benefits, labor practices, and DAI policies, which was a topic we were chatting about earlier. So with that, we have, I believe now, the small discussion groups. And the 3 questions are going to be, is there anything missing from the equity framework outline? And I will say also the timeline. Are there any elements you would refine and or change? And then the question of the equity lens, the kind of questions that the IVR teams would be asking when making key program decisions to make sure equity is embedded throughout. Is this a valuable tool you think for this project or this program? And what kind of questions should we be integrating, building off of some of this information we just presented? It looks like we have a hand up, and I'll be handing it over to Roberta also. But yeah, happy to take clarifying questions at this point.
Should I jump in with mine?
Please
okay.
do.
Hi, everyone. Caitlin Ref here with City Portland PBOT. Chris, thank you so much for that presentation. It's helpful. I think I just have maybe a process-related question with the timeline that you had shared, and then also what Angela shared at the beginning of the meeting in terms of the program's overall timeline and how the framework will be used to input into the current technical work. Seeing as though I think design options are being developed now to get to that alternative in the fall. And sorry, I don't have that in front of me right now, but if you could maybe speak to that a little bit more, that would be helpful.
Yeah, and other members of the project team, feel free to jump in, but you know, your observation is correct. A lot of this is happening concurrently. And so as we develop the framework, these other pieces are also moving along. So that is one of the things that we need to figure out as we're kind of moving at warp speed here. But Jake, does it look like you were wanting to jump in too?
Yeah. I mean, I think in an ideal world, we would have been able to develop, a framework that then we apply to the development of the screening criteria. It's not an ideal world. And we, have had a pretty accelerated timeline in developing some of these things so that we can meet our milestones. And so we've had to, we had to focus on purpose and need, and now we're focused screening criteria, performance measures, but those will be incorporated. But it's like Chris said, I mean, we're kind of doing them at the same time and hoping they inform each other, but certainly open to thoughts on how we go about doing this in the best way possible.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just interject by saying they are concurrently, but in a lot of ways, I think the conversations that we've all been having are elements of the framework. And so I think, part of what we have now are a bunch of pieces that will result in an actual framework. And, such as we've already produced the historical context piece. This body has had some good discussions around that. We've been rolling up our sleeves relative to screening criteria and the performance measures. So I think we are applying an equity lens already on the development of some of these elements, but it's not necessarily going through this document per se. One of the reasons why I think we're pressing, and I know I've been pressing the team to have the framework complete by fall, is such that as we really get into the performance measures, we really can be intentional relative to how the framework can influence that process.
Caitlin, does that make sense to you? Does it give you a little more clarity? And also, I mean, if you have any input or recommendations based on what you heard.
I think I'll leave it for now. Thank you. It was helpful.
Sounds good.
Chris, if I could just jump in, I think it's important to also understand that the level of design in the design options is still fairly high level. It's not getting down into where the sidewalks are or where ADA ramps are. That's all, that'll be later in the design refinement. It's really getting alignments set. And I think as John L. said, you know, really working with this group to get equity-based screening criteria is developed through this summer so that come September, it's ready to feed into the screening process. So that's, you know, we are trying to align that, and it's, again, a very iterative process. If we feel we're not hitting the mark or capturing a nuance that's important for this group and for the program, you know, we adapt. That's why we have several months for that screening process. It's not just a one-time shot.
And just to make another note, I know we want to jump into small group discussions. What I think is important for all of us to remember is this has never been done before on a mega project. And so we will be flying the plane and building it at the same time. This is what it feels like to be on the cutting edge. And we have looked. We've consulted our national partners and equity groups all across the nation. Equity, the way in which Greg is really advancing this program, has never been embedded in a mega project before. So from that perspective, we are kind of figuring it out along the way.
Other questions or thoughts, or should we break out into our groups?
A quick comment.
Sure.
As we have committed to all of the groups, we're not going to miss any steps, and we are moving with a purpose, and we have deadlines that that folks are expecting us to hit as far as getting this through processes. But our commitment is not to miss any steps. And if you at any time feel that we are missing steps, call us on it. So.
Any other clarifying questions? We'll have lots of other time to dive in here in our breakout groups. But thank you for that question, Caitlin. Those are the kind of questions we want to be chewing on, you know, in our breakout rooms as we jump in there now. So, any burning questions, or do we go forward?
Go forward, and then we catch those burning questions when we come back.
Sounds
All right,
good.
we had some great discussion there. So we're going to do 25 minutes for the breakout rooms, and I will send a quick message when we're getting close to the end of those. So you should move to your rooms automatically.
Brent, I came back too soon.
It's always that way, Roberta.
So frustrating.
You guys ran out of runway, Roberta?
Well, I hit the wrong button. You know, like once the buttons start going, I get all flummoxed, and then I usually kick myself out.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Looking forward to the input. Roberta, are you going to be taking the reins on this one, or?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. All right. So I think we probably have about is it what, 10 minutes, or how much time do we have for input right now?
Yeah. Do we have anyone signed up, Brent, for public comment?
We don't have anyone on board for public comment yet.
Okay, great. So we'll keep going till we in case somebody comes for public comment, and then we'll make space for them. So we'll start with input or takeaway from the discussions. One question that came from our group was, is the lens embedded into the framework?
Yes.
Right. So am I right? So how I understand it, we have our equity definition, which is guiding the priorities of our framework, and our framework is looking at different areas that we need to focus on, and our equity lens is guiding our inquiry, our questions for the focus areas of the framework. Am I correct?
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, well, so I'll just say that the same question was posed in our group, and I said, it's what you guys wanted, what you want it to be in terms of the purpose. We were kind of thinking about it as we had framed the question for the steps along the arc of the process for the project team to be able to kind of make sure that they're aligning. But certainly it can be used in terms of the framework development as well. So I think that's a good point.
Yeah, I think the way that we had been discussing it was like as a tool, as one of the products or tools that's in the framework, and that tool could be used. I was actually thinking of it just kind of as internal staff, but then in our group discussion, one thing that was really, really poignant was, well, it's not just staff, it's really everybody connected to the project. So I think Chris is right. We can use it however this group thinks we should.
And so Nakachis, I'm just going to call you out if you don't mind, but you feel free to express what you wanted what you had said, or I could express it for you if you prefer. Okay, so Nakachis' point was that depending on what we want to use these questions for, then that obviously will guide your input in terms of what kind of questions you want us to be posing or what we want to include. So if it's for the framework development, that's probably a different set of questions than versus the project team, as an example. Did I do a good job, Nakachis? Sort of. Roberta, did you have any other input or thoughts from your group?
No, I think how about well, you've shared a little bit from your group. How about Jake or Janelle or one of the voices of the people who shared?
Yeah, I'm happy to chat a little bit about what we came up with. So to the first question, which is there anything missing from the equity framework outline? We also talked about a description of how equity tools like the equity lens will actually be operationalized. That's going to be important. We had a robust conversation that ultimately what we're talking about relative to implementing the equity framework is really about risk mitigation. That if we do this effectively, we are both achieving a much more equitable program, as well as lessening the risks that the program will need to deal with from a program management perspective. That the framework and the lens are actually part of program management and operations. So that was important for us to really get clear and tease out the decision-making and how will decisions be made, how this document will help influence those decisions. Also a section in terms of the values. How will the team, the program team, hold itself to equity values that we are hoping that will be espoused externally. So some discussion in terms of how the team as a whole will hold itself accountable to this equity framework is going to be key. And then on the third question, a lot of discussion just in terms of, you know, what are we going to do? How will we be doing it? Who will be impacted? Who will be better off? Who needs to be in the conversation? Who is missing from the conversation? A notion of really tapping a lot of the bodies that we already have and having some cross-sectional bodies that we might put together. You know, we have CAG and we have EAG and we have the ESG. Might there be some opportunities where we can kind of pull together some of those groups to kind of tackle some of these things? Let's see here. And the last thing is just this notion of target universalism, that if we focus on the needs of those in our community who may need the most support, then we thereby will solve for all others. And so really figuring out how do we integrate target universalism into our design concepts, and how do we get to a culturally infused design as a concept is something else we talked about. Group, did I miss anything?
Only that I'm curious about the culturally infused design, if you want to elaborate, or whoever mentioned that want to elaborate about that a little bit.
Sabrina or Steve?
I believe that was Tom's comment.
Well, Tom raised the comment, but it wasn't his comment, but he can add.
That's right. Go for it, Steve.
Basically, we were trying, I mean, we recalled back that we had some folks from our native America, from our indigenous folks that were part of the groups. And one of the things they brought in was, how do we pay homage and respects to the history and cultural heritage that surrounds the bridge? And, you know, how do we make that part of the design thinking without tokenizing the history and heritage and culture?
That's great. Thank you for elaborating on that. Angela took notes for our group. Angela, did you want to share out?
Yeah, I'd like to report out on a couple points that were made by the group you facilitated, Chris. There was discussion about not only looking at measures for delivering the project, but also more future forward looking in terms of what are the post-construction opportunities for businesses in terms of operation and maintenances, so that it can feed into more generational long-term benefits that will ripple through long after the project is constructed. How are we doing this to address that community building? In terms of the equity lens and the questions, there was some good discussion on making sure that the questions aren't just saying, is there harm or not? If the project doesn't cause any harm, that's looked at kind of keeping the status quo, but instead looking at how you might frame the questions on how a particular element of the program makes it better, so that there's more equity advancement, that make sure that these questions are generating, that are impactful, not passive. See what else do I have here? Just again, making sure that the process and the project directly meets the needs and expectations of the communities, and looking broad enough throughout the entire project area for those benefits for folks who may not be directly in the project area, but as we saw on those demographic maps that Jake presented, those dark green areas, if people aren't able to drive, you know, and they're not right there next to the, say, the transit stations, you know, how do they get to that place so that they can also benefit from this project? I think that's most of the highlights. Did I miss anything key from our group that?
Yeah, I'll just highlight a couple of other questions, example questions. So opportunities to make improvements to support those that do not drive. So other things that you can do outside of perhaps the scope of the project to benefit those populations or those demographics, opportunities or challenges in regards to the project footprint. So what can you do with the actual physical project that can advance equity? And then, as was mentioned, I think that the generational impacts of longer-term ripple effects that might be caused by the project, and how we can measure that over time and address over time.
Real quick, I'll share from my group. One thing that stood out is the relation of the lens, and how in some of the examples they talked about going back to the community and asking, like, gauging, okay, we did this, how did we do? And so ongoing reflection. And so I think that's good, because in that sense, community engagement can be kind of its own component of the lens. It can be its own lens. And I think that's a really insightful comment that I think it was Meg.
Great. All right, so we are now moving towards our closing. We have 3 minutes left. Thank you everyone for your contributions. Why don't we'll do our quick 3 takeaways. So what are 3 things that people are taking away from our time together?
And just real quickly, Roberta, just want to double check that we don't have any public comment. Brent, is that accurate?
That is accurate. There's no public comment at this time.
Okay.
Great, great. And so three takeaways. I'll go with one. I am really appreciating the data deep dive. That for me was really, it was really useful, and it was good to kind of think about the layering of different experiences, different identities, and thinking about what are the needs represented within those experiences. So I really appreciate that. 2 more. Meg.
Hi, it's Meg. I really appreciate that you all have given us a dedicated timeline as to when things are going to be happening soon. I like that we're approaching this on a very fast pace of getting all of this done by the beginning fall. And I think we can do it. I think it's possible. And just having that understanding of when things are going to be finished, we're going to start transitioning to a different kind of thinking. I think that's going to be really lovely. So thank you very much.
Awesome. One more. Guys, come on.
If no one else jumps in, I'm just going to jump in. And for me,
dangling.
I think I saw Steve wave his hand.
All right, I'll back up.
Go for it, Jack. I need to eat. I'm ready. It's hot in the mouth.
Okay.
Chris.
Go for it, Jake.
No, I didn't want to go. I saw Lily had her hand.
Oh.
Hey, Lily.
Oh, you guys. All right. I am coming away from this meeting with a more concrete idea of how these things that we've been talking about for a long time will actually be actualized and implemented, and that's exciting for me. And I know I also want to sort of echo what others have said in that I really appreciate the work that the staff did in between this meeting and the prior meeting. This was really helpful. Yeah, I feel like, so I see the work that you did and I really appreciate it. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So I think Brent's going to put up a meeting evaluation poll, a very quick one. And while that comes up, I'm going to, so please fill that out. And I'm going to keep talking. July 19th, 5:30 to 7:30, we have our next time together where we'll talk about the first draft equity framework and draft screening criteria for designing outcomes. And August 16th, 5:30 to 7:30, we'll have our second draft equity framework and screening criteria recommendations. So we'll move at a fast clip and we'll get somewhere. All right, so we are complete. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your work, and I appreciate when you all reach out in between meetings. It's very helpful. So.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go
Bye,
eat,
everyone. Yeah, go eat, Steve.
Great work, Jake and Chris.